Chapter 1: The Hand on the Wall. Somewhere in the dark of a cave, tens of thousands of years ago, a person lifts a hand and presses it flat against cold stone. We don't know the name or the face, or whether it belonged to a man or a woman, a hunter or a grandmother or a child. We know only what happened next, because it left a mark that has outlasted empires, ice ages, and the rise and fall of the entire human world since. The person takes a mouthful of powdered red earth, mixed with spit or water or animal fat, fingers spread against the rock. And then, in a fine red mist blown from the lips, the color sprays across the wall and around the living hand, and when the hand pulls away, something new exists in the universe that did not exist a moment before. It is a hand made of absence. Where warm skin had been, there is now a hand-shaped gap, ringed in red, printed onto the stone. The hand itself is gone. It walked out of the cave, it grew old, it turned to dust 40,000 years ago. But the sign of it remains. I was here. I existed. I pressed my living hand against the everlasting rock, and I knew, even then, that I would not last and the rock would. Go to these caves today, in Spain, in France, in Indonesia, in Argentina, and you will find these hands by the dozens and the hundreds, some so small they must have belonged to children, layered over one another across centuries, waving out of the deep past. And here is the strange thing you feel, standing before them, that no amount of warning quite prepares you for. You feel greeted. Across a distance of time so vast it should be unbridgeable, a specific person you will never know is reaching out of the wall toward you. And the message could not be simpler or more human. I am here. Reach up and fit your own hand into the outline, as visitors always want to do, and the years fold shut like a closing fan. Two hands, 40,000 years apart, almost touching. That gesture, that a smear of red on a wall could stand for a hand, and a hand could stand for a whole vanished human being. And that meaning could leap across an abyss of time from one mind to another, is the most important thing our species ever learned to do. Everything in this book grows out of it. Before we could build a city or prove a theorem or split an atom, we had to be able to do this so one deceptively small thing. To make one thing stand for another. For almost the entire history of the universe, nothing ever did. This is worth sitting with, because it is easy to assume that thinking is just what minds naturally do, the way rivers flow downhill. It isn't. For 9 billion years after the Big Bang, there was no such thing as meaning anywhere, only matter and energy grinding through their long, mindless routines. Then, on one small planet, life appeared, and for another few billion years even that life did not mean anything to itself. Bacteria multiplied in the warm seas without a single thought. The great forests of the Coal Age grew and fell in silence. The dinosaurs ruled the Earth for over 150 million years, a stretch of time so enormous that our own species, by comparison, has existed for less than the blink between two words. And in all those ages, as far as we can tell, not one creature ever looked at anything and understood it to mean something else. A thing that means something else. Hold that phrase up to the light, because it is the whole trick. When a wolf smells a deer, the scent doesn't stand for the deer. The scent simply is the deer, as far as the wolf's brain is concerned. A direct alarm wired straight to the legs. But the red hand on the wall is different in kind. It is not a hand. Everyone who made one and everyone who saw one understood perfectly well that it was not a hand. It was a sign for a hand, a stand-in, a symbol, a thing deliberately made to point at something it is not. And once a mind can do that, once it can let this stand for that, an entire hidden country swings open, because the thing a symbol points at does not have to be present. It doesn't even have to be real. This is the true magic, and scientists who study language have a plain name for it: displacement. It means the ability to hold in your mind what is not in front of you, the animal that is not here, the person who is no longer alive, the season that has not yet come, the world that could exist but doesn't. Every other creature on Earth is chained to the present moment, to the here and the now and the actually happening. The symbolic mind slipped that chain. It could summon the absent, mourn the dead, plan for the not yet, and imagine the never was, and once you can do all of that, you can do anything. You can plan a hunt for tomorrow. You can picture a god. You can wonder what happens after you die. You can invent a number, tell a lie, dream up a law, or design a cathedral in your head and then spend 300 years building it. The proof, the prayer, the poem, and the periodic table all rest on the same foundation, a mind holding something that is not there. So the real question, the origin question, the one at the root of the whole human story is this: when did matter first wake up enough to do it? When did some corner of the universe first start making pictures of itself? We will never have a perfect answer, and the reason is frustrating but also rather beautiful. The most powerful symbol system our species ever built is language itself. Words are nothing but sounds we have agreed will stand for things, and language leaves no fossils. Words evaporate the instant they're spoken. There is no way to dig up a conversation from 100,000 years ago, so we cannot excavate the symbolic mind directly. We can only hunt for its shadows, the durable, physical things that a symbol-using creature leaves behind and a non-symbolic one never would. And when archaeologists went looking for those shadows, the trail led them somewhere the old story hadn't predicted. For a long time the assumption was that the human mind switched on in Europe, in the era of the famous painted caves, in a sudden burst of genius maybe 40,000 years ago. But dig in Africa, the continent where our species was actually born, and the shadows reach back far, far deeper. In a cave called Blombus, on a windswept stretch of the South African coast, researchers found small snail shells, each one pierced with a neat hole and worn smooth in a way that only happens when something is strung on a cord and rubbed against skin. They are beads. They are roughly 75,000 years old, and they are not food, not tools, not anything a body needs to survive. A bead is pure symbol. A bead worn on the body says this is who I am, I belong to these people, I hold this rank, I am spoken for, and it says it to anyone who can read the code. To wear a bead is to make a statement in a silent language everyone around you already understands. And beads older still keep turning up. In a Moroccan cave, pierced shells have been dated to more than 140,000 years ago, ornaments worn on human bodies before our species had ever left Africa. The same cave at Blombus gave up something even more startling. Slabs of soft red ochre, that same iron-rich earth used to paint the hands, deliberately engraved with careful cross-hatched patterns, neat diamonds and lattices scratched into the stone with a sharp point. They are around 77,000 years old, and they are not decoration on a useful object. They seem to be pattern for pattern's sake, design as an idea. And then, in the same layers, a single flake of stone bearing a set of lines drawn in an ochre crayon, deliberate, cross-hatched, unmistakably intended. It is roughly 73,000 years old, and it may be the oldest known drawing on Earth. The moment, or a moment, when a human being first held a piece of pigment and made a mark simply because they meant to. The picture that emerges is not of a sudden switch flipping on in Ice Age Europe. It is of a slow, deep dawn across Africa, engraved ostrich eggshells, used as water flasks and marked like signatures, workshops where ochre was ground and mixed and stored in abalone shells 100,000 years ago, ornament and pattern and meaning accumulating for tens of thousands of years before anyone ever set foot in the caves that would later make us famous. Those famous caves, when they finally come, still stop the breath. The oldest known paintings of actual things, not patterns, but pictures, images of real animals rendered on rock, are not in Europe at all. On the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, in a cave in the hills, there is a life-sized painting of a warty pig, its bristled back and blunt snout captured in red, and it has been dated to at least 45,000 years ago. On the walls of Chauvet cave in southern France, painted around 36,000 years ago, herds of horses and rhinos and lions surge across the stone with such confident, fluid genius that when the cave was rediscovered, some experts simply refused to believe the dates. The work looked far too accomplished, too modern, to be so old. They were wrong. The mastery was there from very near the beginning. And these were not art galleries. That is the thing the guidebooks can undersell. These images are often found deep in the most inaccessible throats of the caves, far past daylight, in chambers you have to crawl and squeeze to reach. They were meant to be seen by torchlight, and torchlight changes everything. The flame gutters and swings, and in its restless orange glow the painted animals move, muscles flex, legs gather, an eye catches the light and seems to turn toward you. Some of the most heavily decorated chambers, we now know, are also the most acoustically alive, the places where a sound rings and resonates most powerfully in the dark. These were not decorations hung on a wall, they were something closer to theaters, or temples, charged spaces where, by firelight and echo, human beings summoned the absent animals out of the stone and made them live again. The whole point of the enterprise was displacement, calling what is not here into the presence of the mind. But the most radical idea our ancestors left in the ground is not painted at all. It is buried. At some point, human beings began, deliberately, to bury their dead, to dig a grave, arrange the body, and place things inside it. In caves at Kafzerenskal, in what is now Israel, people were laid to rest more than 90,000 years ago sprinkled with red ochre, and in one grave a child was buried cradling the antlers of a red deer in its arms. Stop and consider what a grave good actually is. You do not give a gift to a corpse. You give it to a person, to someone you believe, at some level, still is. To place a treasured object in the ground with the dead, is to make a claim that flies in the face of every visible fact. That death is not simply the end, that the person has gone somewhere, rather than merely ceased, that they might, wherever they now are, still have need of what you loved them enough to bury. With that single gesture, death stops being a fact and becomes a question, perhaps the oldest question we have, the one that would later drive so much of what we'll meet in the pages ahead. Religion, philosophy, the terror and the hope that run under the whole human story. It is the first great, and it is scratched not into a wall, but into the earth itself, in a grave dug by people who could not accept that someone they loved was simply, finally gone. Here is the twist the science of the last few decades keeps insisting on, and it is the first of many humblings in this book. The symbolic mind may not have been ours alone. For generations we told ourselves that we Homo sapiens, the ones, were the sole owners of this gift, the single species ever to cross the threshold into meaning. That story is fraying. In Spanish caves, certain wall markings and hand stencils have been dated, by measuring the thin crust of mineral that slowly grew over them, to more than 60,000 years ago, older than the arrival of our kind in Europe. If those dates hold, and they are fiercely argued over, then the artists were Neanderthals, the thick-boned cousins we long dismissed as brutes. There is other evidence pointing the same way. Neanderthals collected eagle talons and seashells that seemed to have been worn, used pigment, and buried their dead. In a cave in the mountains of Iraq, a Neanderthal was laid down among clusters of ancient pollen, leading to the haunting, endlessly debated idea that he had been buried under a blanket of flowers. And there is a stranger case still. Deep in a South African cave system, reachable only through cracks, so narrow that the excavators had to be small enough to wriggle through them, lie the bones of Homo naledi, a human cousin with a brain only about a third the size of yours. Its discoverers have made an astonishing and hotly contested claim, that these small-brained beings deliberately carried their dead into the pitch-black heart of the cave to dispose of them, and may even have scratched patterns into the walls. Most scientists want much stronger proof before they'll accept it, and they are right too. But the very fact that it's a live argument tells you how much the old, comfortable border has shifted. Symbolic thought, it turns out, may not be the sharp, bright line that neatly separates us from everything else. Even the origin of the human mind refuses to sit tidily inside our species. It is the first hint of a pattern we will meet again and again. Every time we go looking for the thing that makes us uniquely special, the boundary blurs, and the world turns out to be larger and stranger, and more crowded with kin than we had assumed. So why is this chapter 1 and not chapter 0? Because this is where meaning itself begins, and meaning is the raw material of every idea that follows. Underneath the beads and the buried children and the horses galloping by torchlight, there is a single engine driving all of it, and it is metaphor, the mind's power to see that this is like that. The bear is like a person, so perhaps it has intentions, and can be honored, or feared, or asked for pardon. The sharp stone is like a claw, so it can be gripped and made to tear. The red of ochre is like the red of blood, which is like life itself, so it belongs with the living body and with the dead who have lost it. Every one of these leaps takes two separate things and welds them into a meaning that is more than either, and a creature that can weld like that can build, from the raw stuff of the world, an entire second world made of ideas. That is the country we have lived in ever since. We are the animals who dwell inside our own imaginings, and we have been furnishing that inner country, one idea at a time, for at least 100,000 years. It began with a mark. Matter, in one small corner of an enormous and indifferent cosmos, woke up just far enough to leave a note. And the note said the thing that every human being, in every age since, has most wanted to say and most feared would go unheard. I am here. I was real. I knew that I would not last. Reach up. Fit your hand to the wall. For tens of thousands of years, that awakened mind lived exactly as it had begun, in small bands of hunters and gatherers, following the herds, painting the dark, burying their dead, dreaming their gods. Wandering a world they could imagine but not yet remake. The ice held the north in its grip, and life moved to the ancient rhythm it always had. Then the ice began to loosen. The world warmed, and in a few scattered places, some of these dreamers did something that no creature had ever done before, something that would have been flatly impossible without this new power to picture a future that did not yet exist and then wager everything on it. They looked at a wild seed in their hand, and they saw next year's field. They stopped following the world. They began, for the first time, to build one.